First part of the video is very quick. It's just about disassembly. There's not much to it. There's a C-clip in here. You just pull this shaft off of here. You then want to pry on this pry point here, and then whack from the underside here to separate this half. If it gets really tough, there is a little pry point here, but be very careful because you don't want to damage the sealing surface around the edge. So if you start prying up all around the case, you can damage the sealing surface. So do be careful of that. Once you've separated the two halves, you'll be left with something like this. Now, the next hardest bit to deal with is this entire assembly here will be really stuck in the case. You need to whack it out from that side, or I found the easiest is to put the whole thing in the press and just push that shaft out from that way. If you don't have a press and you're just changing the chain or something like that, do not under any circumstances whack that with a hard surface hammer. You will deform the end and there's zero room for it to be mushroomed. It will not go back on the front drive shaft. So if you're going to whack it really hard because it is properly on there, put a piece of wood, put something to cushion the blow from directly damaging the metal. Because if you mushroom that at all, it will not go back on the front drive shaft. You have been warned. Once you've whacked that out, you'll be left with this complete assembly. The chain should now come off, and the clutch assembly just slides off of this shaft here. To get this out of the case, you want to put an 18mm socket in there to splay open that clip and then whack it from the other side. You can either put it in the press to get it out or literally hit it with a dead blow hammer. It's not very hard to get it out of this case. Just make sure that it's fully opened, and an 18mm socket will do it perfectly. Right, these are all the bits you'll need to do a complete rebuild minus the clutch pack, right? You've got genuine BMW oil for the transfer case. Just buy genuine. It is literally £10 difference between genuine and aftermarket. Get the good stuff. This here is a seal kit, a complete seal kit inside and out. This little bearing you see here, part number, that is the bearing for this part here. You can literally just press out the old bearing, put the new one in, instead of buying a new part for £20. That bearing is only a £5. The next bearing we're going to go with is this one here, which is actually hidden, I'll show you later on, in the bottom of the clutch pack. Part number is super duper tiny. I'm just going to have to show it to you because you're not going to be able to see it. Oh, wait, hello. You can see it. Part number right there, HK4520. This bearing here is part of the clutch pack. And then these two bearings are the same bearing, part of the clutch pack. You need to buy these. These are the things that fail. These are the things that make the whine and the horrible noise in your transfer case. Next, we got the brand spanking new chain. You don't necessarily need to change this unless yours is actually making noise, but whilst you're in there, just get it done. You might as well change it once and be done with it. Then you've got an actuator arm that fails terribly, always causes that horrible bearing whine noise because it starts to fall apart. I'll show you how this is always damaged and people don't replace it, and it will just make a horrible noise. This is a brand new oil pump, always wears out, these massive grooves. You're gonna need to buy this regardless of whatever build you do. And then finally here, this is a complete bearing kit, which are the large bearings inside the housing of the case. I buy that just to get it done right. Right, we're gonna replace this bearing. Right. Now to take it out, you wanna get yourself a 19mm socket right there, and then just push out the old bearing. Easy peasy. Next, to put the new one in, it's as simple as a 24mm socket. Just pushing the new bearing. Fits in beautifully, doesn't touch the sides, and won't damage the bearing. Right, this is the bearing you're going to need. It's the HK2512. If you look when putting it in, it's got a tapered edge. So you want to make sure the writing is facing that way around. Like so. Kind of centers it in place. Then get your 24mm socket, place it on top, and then press it in. Right, and there you go. Make sure it's fully bottomed out. and still spins freely. And there's that bearing replaced. Easy.
When changing these two bearings, I found it easiest to take these two bearings off, place it in the press, run a spanner from here to there, underneath the bearing, and then pop it off. Do not press on these freeze plugs. These freeze plugs, this one here will push into the housing if you mess up. There's another freeze plug down the back end. Do not, if you're using a puller or something, press on these freeze plugs. They will move out of place before the bearing comes off. So if you're going to use a puller or something, make sure you've got something to support it and you're not pressing on the freeze plugs. Either one. You have been warned now. When reassembling this, you're going to need one of the old bearings, and you're going to need something similar to this. This is a bearing press tool piece that I'll be using to press down. But what will happen is it will bottom out before the bearing bottoms out. So what you're going to have to do is start it off with the bearing, like so, like so. And then once this bottoms out, you take this off, you get your old bearing, place that on top, and then press it down the final way so that it fully bottoms out. And there's the problem I'm on about. By just using the cup, it will bottom out before the bearing does. And if you look, the bearing's still got that much further to go. Now, if you get yourself your old bearing, slot that on top and use that as a spacer, you can then carry on pressing it all the way down until it's seated. You don't need to worry about the old bearing getting stuck on the shaft. It literally just pops right off. And now it is fully seated and ready to go. Now let's do the other side. Now for the other side, exact same bearing on there and pressed in, obviously, with the exact same bush tool. All right, on there, down, bottoms out, you're done. And then that will be that entire part rebuilt. Easy, eh? There we are, fully rebuilt. Two of the same bearings, one press there, one press there. Not very hard. Just remember, don't push on these bearing caps. Whatever you do, you have been warned. Right, moving on to the first bearing that's in the case. You can just pop this out, discard that. Then here's your bearing in the case. It probably not in the best condition like my one. So it comes out from the inside out. So you can either press it out or whack it out, whatever you want to do. Just make sure you don't whack it from this side down because you'll crack the case. That side outwards. Here's what it looks like from the inside. I'm going to be using this bushing tool. On there, press it straight out as is. It should drop out as is. You don't need to put a cup underneath. Literally lay it flat on the press, pop it straight out. Or you can whack it out. Just make sure you don't damage the housing when you do it. There it is, all out. There's enough space between the bearing and the housing that it just plops out flat, so you can just rest this flat on the press or table or whatever you're doing to whack it out with. You don't have to worry about cupping something underneath it or worrying about the bearing getting stuck before it bottoms out, before it falls out. It will fall out. It's nice and easy, not hard to do. This is the bearing that goes in that hole, writing facing outwards. Doesn't matter too much because it's tapered on both edges, but that's the way it came out. You do that and you press it in. I'll be pressing it in with this bushing spacer size. It's the perfect size that fits just on the outer edge, and then you press it in until it bottoms out. There we go, pressed in, fully seated. Wasn't hard, super easy, anyone can do it. Next I'm going to do is I'm going to get a new seal, put that in, show you how to do that, and then we're done. Move on to the next part. Whilst we're already here, let's get the seal done at the same time and be done with this side of the housing. So you're going to need this size, plop that on around the edge and then press it down. There it is, pushed in. You want to make sure that it is level with the inner lip just in there. You don't want to go further than that. You don't want to bottom it out. You just want to make sure it's directly level with the inner lip. If you've done that, you've done it right, and you can move on. Whilst I've already replaced the other seal in the other case, we might as well get these seals done as well. So 8mm is how far it goes in, all the way around. You don't want to go further than that. It needs to go 8mm and that's it. You've got to leave a little cavity behind for some oil to like film and build up and help lubricate the bearing. If you bottom this out, you'll reduce that cavity and reduce the amount of oil that gets to the back of this bearing. 8mm, as far as it seats in, all the way around. That's it. And this one is very simple, just like the other one. You just make sure it sits exactly flush with the inner lip. That is it. No further. Exactly flush with the inner lip, and you're done. Right, we're going to knock these seals out so they're out of the way for now. You can either press them out or pull them out. They come out this way and this way. Next, we're doing the main drive shaft bearing. You put it in the press like that after you remove the seat clip that goes up here, and you press down, and up it comes. Once it gets to about here, it will pop off, and then make sure you have this in your hand at the time, or you catch it, or it lands on a soft blanket, because you do not want this to crack on the floor. It's made of hardened steel, and when dropped, it is likely to crack. Do not drop this. And here's the new bearing. It's the bearing, you can't mistake it, with the weird groove in it, which makes it almost impossible for me to try and locate it separately. This then goes like so. Like that, with the groove on there on the shaft, facing that way around. I am going to be putting it in by grabbing it like this, in the press, and then closing the jaws. And I'm going to press by forcing the top of the shaft down. It's not the best way to do it, but it's the only way I can do it in the limited space that I have. The best way to do it would be to put the bearing in the housing first. All right, in the housing here first, then using a press the shaft into the bearing with a cup down below to make sure all the force is only on the drive shaft itself and the inner bearing. But I don't have enough space. Like if I did that in this press, I would have no room. So I'm doing the next best option, which is going to be to press it on the shaft first, and then press on the very end of this shaft into the aluminium housing. The reason why I'm choosing it to do it that way around is it'll be a lot harder to press this bearing onto a steel shaft than it is to press it into an aluminium housing. This aluminium housing, you can whack this bearing out with literally a dead blow mallet. Whack it out very easily. It's not very hard to be pushed in here. I don't think pushing in here is going to cause a massive strain on the bearing. It is very easy to push it into this housing, but it is not easy to push it in here. So I'd rather risk this on the press, because it's much harder to do, than try and risk pushing it while it's already in the housing here. So for a little bit more context, this is how I'm doing it. I've closed the jaws, put the bearing there. The jaws are actually sitting on the inner race here and on the outer race. So in theory, it should just be a flat surface being pushed up. So it shouldn't cause very little or strain on the bearing itself anyway. Not necessarily the best way to do it, but is the way I'm doing it. Just letting you know. If you do copy the exact thing I did, I did come into a small problem. Easy to overcome, but you must be aware of it. So when pressing it in, originally the plates, the jaws were here and then bottomed out on here. Now my press has a gauge. As soon as it climbed at all, I knew something had gone wrong. So I stopped. If your press doesn't have a gauge, be very observant. Once it hits there, you then want to pull the plates out so that it is just this inner bearing race and the outer bearing race. That's it, it's touching it. Then, once you press it down, maybe a small amount, just like that, readjust the jaws, make sure they're pushed in again, and then continue pressing all the way down. Do not bottom out on this little lip here and continue going. This bearing should go on with less than a ton of pressure. It really does take barely anything to get it on this shaft. It is not a rusty old steel bearing that takes 20 tons to take off. It literally takes 1 ton or less to put it back on. All right, once done that, put the spacer, C-clip, and this bearing here. Pre-lubricate this bearing, slide it down, clip it on, and you're done. But don't forget, there's one final thing at the very bottom. There's one of those little O-rings if you're wondering where those go. Right in there. I'm going to be replacing the seal in here. before I put the bearing in. This is the seal that goes in. You honestly can't mess it up. Anything again, you have to remember, has to go down 8 mil, no further, no less. I will be using this cup, which is the biggest one in the kit. It is a hair too big, so you can't press all the way down without potentially getting it stuck in the housing or damaging the housing. But start this off until that goes level. Then get the old seal, use it as a spacer, put this back and carry on until you get down to the 8 mil. Right, I've just replaced this seal here. It did not go to plan. Well, I was meant to just push in and be done, but because of the studs underneath here that get in the way so you can't level it on the press, and the fact that every time I tried to press it, it went uneven, I had to do it the old-fashioned way. The old-fashioned way, you get yourself a mallet and tap around the edges. Get yourself the old seal, bang that on top, and then whack it all the way around. Once it is 8 mil all the way around, seated in, you're done. Move on to the next job. Final outer seal. I'm going to use the perfect size bushing press tool. This one here holds it in beautifully, rests just on the outer edge, and you slot it in there. One thing to keep in mind is there's nothing to stop it from bottoming out. You must make sure you stop when it's level with this inner lip. And there you go, the final outer seal in place, flush with the inner lip. Give yourself a pat on the back. You've now replaced all the seals. Next, we're going to install this main drive shaft with this bearing. All you got to do is get yourself an 18 mil socket, slot it in there. That'll keep the clip open for you. You then can use like a dead blow hammer, probably whack it in, or put it in the press until it bottoms out. Another tip, don't forget to lubricate the outer bearing, and don't forget to lubricate the bearing seal so it doesn't run dry for the first time it's used. It's a slight issue I've come across. I'm not sure it's a big problem, but I'm going to try and fix it and I'll tell you if it works. So by pressing it in perfectly, the clip is in, it is nice and freely moving, the washers and everything are in perfectly, but I'm thinking that might cause a noise over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this down a little further, so then that actual inner bearing race is squished up against this C-clip, because the other C-clip is solid and doesn't make any noise, but this might cause a rattle. So I'm going to push it down a little further to make it more impact, and also it should cause this clip to be pushed down tight, because right now it's a bit loose and you can't really hear it on video, but it does make a little bit of noise. So I'm going to give it a little extra oomph and get back to you. And by giving it an extra little shove, this washer no longer makes any rattle, click, click, click noise, and this is now firmly in place. So if you have an issue that I just come across there, where it's clattering about, which must make a noise when it's under acceleration, just give it an extra little shove and it will take up the slack and no longer makes that noise. And finally, the clutch assembly. Now, this bearing, these bearings in here and this arm fail on an incredibly high rate. So if you're hearing any noise from your transfer box, the odds are you need a new one of these arms and you're going to need a whole set of bearings in here. In total, there are 4 bearings. There's 2 here, 1 wedged on the main shaft in the middle, and there's a hidden one underneath this one. That's probably the hardest one to remove. These are easy to remove. Now what holds this whole thing together is there's normally a little C-clip in here. Now if you're trying to take this apart, you've got to be aware the entire thing is under load. It's compressed down. So if you try and take a C-clip up, if you do wrestle and fight with it, the whole lot will jump up and you'll have no way to get it back down again. So for me, I put a socket here, a spanner across the two, and I compress it. I then grab C-clip pliers, for little angle ones, slot them there, fight with it, open it, and then release the pressure, and then it pops up. You can't even see the groove where the C-clip pliers, that's how much pressure it is under, and you cannot push it down by hand. Right. When you're ready to dismantle it, you want to grab it like this, ideally with 2 hands, but filming will do. Come on. Right. And then bring it over to somewhere semi-clean, flip it over like that, and there you are. Because the top bit / bottom bit you see now is like holding the whole thing. It's connected here. First thing to look out for is on this surface here. If that bearing has failed badly, it will damage here and you will need a new one of these. All right? But you see this one, it is still in incredibly good condition. If you catch it early enough, you'll save yourself some money and you can just reuse this part. But if it's got massive gouges in it or chunks missing, stuff like that, it's been left too long and the bearing is eaten into this, you'll have to replace this. Under that, we've got the clutch packs themselves. So this is a hard wearing plate. It will have grooves in it. The same way the underside of this will have a couple of little grooves. That does not matter, doesn't make any difference, doesn't make any noise. What that is when the four-wheel drive system engages, the whole entire pack gets compressed, and as it slams together, it just causes a little wear here. That is, I can't even feel it on my nail, but it's irrelevant. You shouldn't have to ever replace any of these parts because of that wear. Below this massive disc, you'll have the rest of your clutch plates. So you've got the clutch material ones and the metal clutch plates themselves. These, when brand new, measure at 1.6 mil thick. So assuming your clutches haven't been burnt out via a failed motor gear, then you shouldn't need to buy a clutch pack at all. Just check every single one, dismantle the entire thing. It's not hard to do. It'll be, from what you see here, it'll be metal plate, clutch pack, and then metal plate all the way down, finishing with a metal plate at the end. That's it. Just measure each and every one of them. It should measure as close to 1.6 mil as possible. And if they're within tolerances, as in as close as that's possible, don't bother buying a new clutch pack. Also, you've got these spring plates in here. You should have 4, and they're positioned in stacks of 2, kind of looking like a UFO. You know, the curve goes, it's lower here, higher there, and the one below it is stacked opposite way around. So best way to describe it, if I can try and get one out. As you see, you tell me that doesn't look like an old-fashioned flying saucer. You should have 2 of those stacked on top. Very important, because this is what allows the clutch to disengage. So when the car stops asking for all-wheel drive, it then releases the motor, and these springs are what disengage your clutch from working. Make sure these are the right way around. Moving on to the main problem with this clutch assembly, which is this bearing here. It always fails, and it makes it sound like a horrible, like failed wheel bearing inside your transfer case, and it's this bearing. And if I can find some damage for you, right there. See that damage right there? That's the stage they start to fail. They start to have loads of damage marks like that on it. So that's some of the noise from my transfer case. Sadly, I didn't catch it early enough, and I have to buy one of these arms. Because you see there, left a massive damage on that plate. Now if you ignore that and rebuild it, it will make a noise similar to a failed wheel bearing. So if you want it to be right and not make any horrible noises, you have to change this plate. It's not major money, I think it's like £80, but it's annoying that I now have to replace this part if I want the transfer case to work correctly. Under that, you have 5 ball bearings. What they do is the other arm sits here, and as the transfer case is demanded for all-wheel drive, it splays open and then crushes the pack down. And that's how you get all-wheel drive. If you drop these balls, there's nothing matters. Just put them in 5 holes, nothing fancy. And if we lift this up, now under here, you'll see the other 2 bearings. There is this one on the shaft, which in general, most cases is actually in pretty good condition. But if you're already in here, for the sake of £10 to change this bearing, change it. It'd be stupid to skip it. And then another offending bearing. Now this bearing can also fail similar to the top bearing. It is less likely to, I don't know why, but it can fail just the same. Replace this whilst you're in here. You want to check this surface is still in good condition, and the same on the underside of the other arm. Now let's move on to where the final bearing is located. And that's located right here. Underneath here, you will find a bearing wedged in here. I will show you in a minute how I took it out. It is a pain in the arse to take out. You've been warned,
But if you stick to it, you get it done. This bearing here had a lot of wear, had loads of metal deposits in this groove here. So I highly recommend changing this because mine looked very worn. It's only £10 to change, but it is a pain in the ass to get out. But I'll show you the way I did it, and it's not so bad if you've got a press. But without a press, you may have to come up with another idea on how to get it out. What I've got is I've got two pullers. I've inverted them, so they hook on the inside of the bearing. And then I've got myself an exhaust clamp, which is holding it all together. I'm then going to put it on the press and push through there. And if all goes well, I should pull that bearing right out. Look at the setup I've got to get this most annoying bloody bearing out. Got myself a socket, a big deep socket on there. And I've got myself my puller jaws and an exhaust clamp to keep them clamped together on there. Now we can hear this sweet noise of as it is coming out. Here's the bearing that goes underneath there. It's HK4520. And if you look, there's a taper to the bearing. The writing side's flatter, the no writing side's got a nice little taper to it. So that's the way round it goes. The way I install it is I get the old bearing, I place that on top with this one, writing side down. I then get a metal plate and I push it down until it's seated probably about a mil, maybe 2 mil before the very bottom. You can bottom out, it doesn't matter, but where it originally came from, it had about a mil or 2 gap, which I think is probably there to make it easier to remove it in the future. So then, this is how I'm doing it. Press, plate, old bearing, new bearing, down. Once you've pushed it in far enough, it should look just like this, where it's maybe 2 mil down on the inner lip. It can go further than that, but must go at least 2 mil down on the inner lip. Side note, don't be surprised if this one also gets slightly wedged in there. Get yourself some vice grips, grab on it, pull hard, give it a jiggle, it'll come off. So don't panic if this happens. Worst case scenario, you get yourself a socket through the middle of the whole thing, clamp the vice grips just like this, and whack them out from the other side. But if it does happen to you, don't panic. Just get yourself some vice grips, knock it out, or pull it out. Now time to assemble this. You're going to need 2 of these bearings. And you're going to need 1 of these. Make sure you clean it all up. You apply transfer fluid here and on all the little parts that are going to be contacting metal straight away. So you want some to lube here, here, all the bearings and all the parts that are attached, even the little ball bearings in that arm. You want to put a little bit of lubricant on each one of those when reassembling this. Once you've lubricated there and the bottom there, you slot the bearing on. The bearing goes this way around. If you look at the inner ring of the bearing, there's a divot side and a flat side. The flat side goes this way around. If I show you the old bearing, you'll see what I mean. So see how that side's flat? You turn it upside down, it's kind of stuck, divoted in. That's the way around it goes, just like that. Now I'm going to put the bearing on and the next arm on. I haven't got enough arms to do that and record, but just make sure you lubricate everything whilst you do it. Time to install your brand new arm, if you need one. You probably do. You'll see there's no damage to the surface, and it's in mint condition. So what I've done off camera, installed the 5 ball bearings, installed the other arm and the bearing. You can just see in there. There's nothing there to film. It's not hard to do. Just remember when installing this to make sure to put a bit of oil in each one of those holes and oil the inside here. Oil here as well. If all's going to plan, you should have something that looks like this. Just as the bearing on the other side goes the same way, the flat side faces upwards. When you're lubricating everything, making sure it's all nicely lubed, don't forget to lubricate the ball bearings because they come dry. Next, we'll start to put on the clutch pack. Reassembling, find one of these holes and you've got to line it up with a hole in the drum. I can wiggle the drum with one hand. You'll see there's a hole in the drum. You want to line those 2 holes up. That way, oil can travel through here and make it to the clutch pack itself. This will go on any direction, but make sure that you personally line it up dead on with one of those holes.
because there's a bunch of them around the entire ring, but there's only lines up twice. Watch out for when you're compressing the pack to put the C-ring back on. This here has to line up with the inner teeth on the drum itself. It has a tendency, as you turn it upside down, to flop the whole pack down because it's no longer compressed, and this one here can misalign itself. When you compress it, it should just go down nice and easy straight to the circlip. If it doesn't and it bottoms out a little early and you still can't see the C-clip, stop, because more than likely this disc here is not aligned with the teeth on the drum. So just undo it, realign the bottom disc with the teeth on the drum, and then compress it, and it should go down nicely. The reason why in most cases you're going to require a new oil pump. So what happens, if you can see in there are massive gouges and dents that form over time as it rides on the drum inside the transfer box. Look at those massive gouges. You cannot ignore that. The new one, brand spanking new, perfect and smooth. Then we install the oil pump. And my oil pump came with a new feed hose, but it was slightly longer than my old one. So I just reused the original, slotted it on, and slotted it through there and into the housing. Right, a little side note about the drum. The drum can suffer with little grooves where it rides on the oil pump. This here is superficial, it is negligent grooves, but you can get massive grooves and you then have to replace the drum. But those are surface grooves that you can't even feel with your nail. They do not need to be replaced. To help with reassembly, you're going to put the drum over the clutch pack and then put the whole thing in like that. When assembling it, make sure that this cutout bit lines up with the oil pump, otherwise it won't sit down. And don't forget the spacer. This lives right there. It's very common as you turn around to line it up for it to fall out. Make sure it stays in place. And to get the drum down, you want to line up all the little teeth here with the drum. Should look something like this when you're done. So the hose is lined up into the oil pickup. There's a little magnet that goes in there. Don't forget to install the little magnet. That's all connected in the drum, connected on the oil pump. Next, we're going to install the chain onto these two pieces. When reinstalling the magnet, I like to put a little bit of RTV on the back of the magnet and then stick it down to its groove. So there's no chance if you happen to move the case that it falls out and you don't notice before you reassemble it. And also in case it makes any kind of rattle noise, because it literally just loosely sits in that hole and rattles about. Now when it comes to putting the chain on, it's really simple. So this is already in place. You hook the chain over here. It has little end caps. So once it's one link away from the end, it slots on perfectly. You then slot this in here, feed it outwards until it links all the way over the chain, and then line it up. Then you get yourself a little dead blow hammer, give it a very little tap on top, and it should fall straight in. And now it is fully contained. Now you see there's a lot of slop. That's perfectly normal because you haven't got the other side of the case to level everything out and hold it in place. Now all you've got to do is clean the sides, nice and clean, get them ready for some RTV, and then RTV this side. Once RTV is ready to go on this side, you want to grab this case, flop it over, straight through here, and then press it all down. But you're going to have to lean this off the side of the cabinet, or you're going to have to put some sort of cup or something underneath it, because this shaft here obviously goes beyond the housing of the case. Once you've slotted the two pieces together, you flip it over and you finish off by putting in all the rest of the bolts. The bolts are torqued down to 25 Newton meters in a crisscross pattern, ideally. And then I put that flange on with the new bearing on and put the motor on to squish it all back down. And now we move on to putting into the final drive flange, which literally just slots in there. Just put the drive flange back in. Then you put your O-ring, spacer, and then the C-clip. That all goes in there, and then you're done. That's it, all done with the C-clip in. I really struggled to get the C-clip in. So what I had to do is I had to get 2 screwdrivers and wedge them in that groove right there, pry upwards. whole thing went bump, and there was enough space to finally get the C-clip in. So if you're struggling to get that C-clip in, 2 screwdrivers right there, pull down hard, and it will give you enough space to put that C-clip in. Hope that helps you. Remember, once it's back in the car, you must run software, ISTA, a servo motor check, so it can recalibrate the clutches and it can recalibrate the oil that's in it. Otherwise, potentially you could shorten its lifespan or potentially kill it very quickly if it's not calibrated correctly. Also, if you've done all this effort, I'm assuming you know by now, there's a plastic gear in here that wears out and can cause a lot of damage internally. Please change it as preventative. I think they only cost £10 and take 20 minutes to change. Don't spend all this money rebuilding this entire thing to not change the gear in there. If you've made it this far, leave a comment. Let me know, why are you here? Are you here because you're bored? Are you curious? Is there something wrong with your car? Like, was the effort it took to make this video worthwhile? Did it help at least one other person in this world? Just let me know.